Welcome to the PDIA in Action event series. My name is Salimah Samji, and I am the Director of Building State Capability at the Harvard Center for International Development, and I will be your moderator today. The format of today's session is as follows. I will begin with an overview of this event series, followed by a presentation before we open for question and answer. Please feel free to put questions or comments in the chat during the presentations. Matt Andrews and I co-teach MLD 103M, a field lab class where students learn how to use the PDIA approach by working on real-world problems they learn by doing. The students work together in teams with an authorizer or client who gives them a problem to work on. This year, we asked the alumni of our Implementing Public Policy Executive Program to nominate problems for our students. Over a 7-week period between January and March, our students worked with their authorizer to better understand the problem and to identify entry points. This event series showcases the learning of our students as well as our executive program alumni. Our topic for today's session is legal education reform in Ukraine. And with us, we have our student team, Frederick Tarantino, Ilhom Aliyev, Manoj Kumar, and Yousuf Folathi Alkhoori. Welcome. The students worked with Artem Shaipov, the legal specialist at the USAID New Justice Program and Implementing Public Policy Executive Program alumni. I'd now like to invite Yousuf to get us started. Yousuf, over to you.
Hello, everyone. This is my FM inspiration. The project we worked on is the inadequate legal So the project we worked on is the inadequate legal education system of Ukraine. We are to help the reform of the system by making sense of the problem, constructing and deconstructing it, and then create a space for change through small steps. The story behind the team name is that we started off with 4 members, Manoj, Yousuf, Frederick, and Mike. Out of the first name's initials, we created the name MyFM. An advantage of frequency modulation FM over amplitude modulation AM is that it has a larger signal to noise ratio and therefore rejects radio frequency interference. FM broadcasting is also capable of higher fidelity, which creates more accurate reproduction of the original program sound. We were then joined by Ilhom, whose name in serendipity translates to inspiration, which was added in full to the team name, and our team name became My FM Inspiration. The name of the team inspires our intention to modulate the issue in hand into a clearer form, expanding the understanding of the stakeholders, creating space for change, and developing suggestions towards the betterment of the problem. So I hand over to Frederick for the agenda.
Thank you, Yousuf. I'm going to walk you through some of the upfront work that we did and the processes that we used throughout the 6 weeks. And then I'll pass it to my teammates to show you how we discovered the problem and entry points, and to finish off with the ideas that we came up with. Okay, we had some team building assignments to get started. One of the assignments was to develop our team constitution. Some of the key parts of our constitution was that arguing and debating with each other was a good thing. We agreed to assume the best intentions from people, and that a good debate meant that we had a good meeting. We also thought it was important to be vulnerable and to ask dumb questions, and to sometimes ask the same question multiple times, because sometimes we get different answers or learn something new. And another part of our constitution was that we always gave people the benefit of the doubt. So if life happened like it did during COVID, we never held that against anyone. We always operated like a unit that elevated each other at all times, and we just believed that eventually it would work itself out. Okay, this is the policy unknowns exercise. The basic gist is and I hope I don't get this wrong, but you answer the 10 questions and put down how concerned you are between 0 to 4. If the cumulative score is greater than 30, then you have a complex situation, and using PDIA is a good methodology to use. If the score is less than 30 but greater than 20, then you have a complicated situation. Using PDIA might make sense in this context, but you may be able to use something more like an agile methodology. And if you got a score of 20 or less, then you can probably figure out the project from start to finish using something like a plan and control or a waterfall methodology. As you can see, the Ukraine legal education reform was a topic that we collectively weren't too familiar with. There was a lot of unknowns, and you'll see that too when we talk about some of the discoveries that we made, which is kind of based on the fact that it's just a very different system in place, especially when comparing it to the US. Okay, I'm not going to do PDIA justice with this slide. There's a very fine-tuned methodology behind PDIA that includes looking at problems from a local context, taking a step-by-step approach to breaking down problems into their root causes through tools like the fishbone diagram, using a AAA analysis to identify how much change space there is, finding entry points, searching for possible solutions, taking actions, a reflection. We had lots of times every single week where we had to reflect on what we learned, check in with our authorizer, check in with the team, see what type of challenges that we encountered, getting the feel of the insider and outsider dynamics, communicating our wins to our authorizer to keep that momentum going, highlighting any kind of positive deviance that we came across, adapting, and then repeating with iterations until a solution is developed. So that there's a reason that you'll always catch Professor Andrews with a whiteboard nearby. It's just he's perpetually reiterating all the time. And so, like I said, I'm not going to do the process justice with this one slide, but I can say that I knew about the fishbone diagram and things like the AAA before this class. And I probably used it a couple times in my life. But I feel like this class really brings the use of those tools to the next level. So now I don't look at those tools as like just another regular tool in my toolbox. I really feel like they're very sharpened tools and like must-have tools that I don't want to go into any project without. And this methodology, it's a lot of work, mainly because it involves a lot of communicating. If you are an introvert, which I am to the utmost, this can actually be kind of uncomfortable because it takes a lot of energy to do, because you're constantly meeting with people, you're constantly talking with people that are new, you're building relationships with people that are in different countries. And so, after the first week, we were, meeting with Ukrainian and foreign stakeholders just nonstop. And so it's a lot of work. The PDIA process is also very humbling too, because you kind of need to be in this mindset where you're just constantly learning, especially when you go into a new community with a new way of thinking and different mindsets. That was one of the things that we learned about this project, is that we were dealing with policies that were developed during the Soviet era. And so the last thing on this slide is that being a team is incredibly important. I talked a little bit about asking those dumb questions in a group setting. It has a certain sense of vulnerability to it, but it's also important that we just have each other's back while we're going through this discovery method. One way that our teachers helped us to become closer as a team was that they assigned us an act of kindness every single week. And it could be a little bit cheesy at times because usually we think about teaching kindness as something that we teach kids, but it actually gave us a lot of good laughs. It was a great way to break the ice. And so I would absolutely recommend that as part of your process too. Now I'll turn it over to Yousuf.
To get a better understanding, we interviewed a variety of different stakeholders, from governmental institutions to educational leaders to international education leaders and institutions, to students. Could you move to the other slide? So then to get to know the problem as well, through our authorizer Artem and the given readings, we started to create individual fishbone, specifying what we each think the problem is. We have then consolidated the fishbones into the big one that is presented in front of you. And we divided the problems over different perspectives. The university and programs, student, teachers, testings, governmental interactions, and commercial and organizational, and then external factors as well. Then some of the issues are that we found were that too many law institutions or programs without quality assurance and accreditation, and then lack of coordination between donors, organizations, and leaders to create change, like corruption and bribery across universities, students, and teachers, and also inappropriate fund channeling. Schools can only receive funds if they have legal education offerings. And then one problem was that the curriculum was old and there was a poor internship model. And then after going through the big fishbone and doing the triple, next slide please, and doing the AAA analysis, we've toned down the fishbone to a more focused one. And we focused on the issues where there's possible space for change or space could be created. And the examples of those are the high number of law schools and the lack of standardized exit exam, and also the differentiation between the type of legal education, differentiating between becoming an attorney or kind of other legal education. And now I move it to Manoj for entry points.
Thanks, Yousuf. So on this slide, based on a fishbone analysis and AAA analysis, we identified entry points and we identified priority stakeholders and key areas of engagement. So we have identified 8 priority stakeholders. Number 1 is the National Agency for Higher Education Quality Assurance, NAQA. And this stakeholder we identified to engage on accreditation of law schools, more specific law school related accreditation. And second stakeholder is private legal associations, particularly American Chamber of Commerce, Legal Education Committee of the Association of Lawyers, and this private legal associations stakeholder we identified to engage to explore opportunities for practical experience, particularly for law school students, but also to promote competitions and market-based solutions. Our third stakeholder is Ministry of Education. An area of engagement that we identified is exit examination for all law graduates before they start legal practice, but also to engage in an area of having a common entrance examination to promote more merit-based admission in law schools. Our fourth stakeholder that we identified is the Ministry of Internal Affairs. An area of engagement that we identified is the exit examination, but also fairness in allocation of funds to law schools registered under Ministry of Internal Affairs, but also law schools governed and registered under Ministry of Education. Our next stakeholder is a group of donors, particularly USAID, and area of engagement that we identify is to pull support and facilitation of pilot activities to improve legal education in Ukraine. Our next stakeholder is law schools. An area of engagement that we identified is more in terms of increasing the ownership and decision-making decentralization so that they care more for their own reputation and hence develop a culture of quality. And the last but not the least, we identified students themselves, and our area of engagement that we identified to work with them is creating a demand for quality education and also contributing to the culture of quality in legal education in Ukraine. So now I will hand it over to Ilhom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manoj. And we then decided to test different ideas and to see where what we can do with solving the problem. So one of them is the involvement of the private sector and the business associations in this issue. Began as Manoj just mentioned, AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce, is a large business association in Ukraine, so is in many other countries. So what we thought is we could get together with the American Chamber of Commerce, together with the universities, and together with the Association of Lawyers, and come up with the ranking system that could actually bring in the market-based theory into practice, because these rankings would actually help the universities show and differentiate between each other, and they would try to develop their system internally more and more. And also one of the other good benefits of the American Chamber of Commerce would be the internships, where the university students could actually take on internships in the private sector companies, in private law firms, where they hold the membership within AmCham. Another idea that we had was on specific accreditation criteria for legal education by National Agency for Higher Education quality assurance, because the national agency actually intends to align its recommendations of USAID and European Quality Assurance Agency, and it's also quite connected with the Ministry of Education, which means it can influence the legislation. Another very interesting idea that we had was the Singaporean model, because we did some research and we got to know that the Singapore actually has restricted the number of its schools which are accredited to provide law education, which means that it's not a vast number of the universities and law school students. And at the same time, there is a Singapore Institute of Legal Education that has the authority to impose and improve the standards of legal education. And by a matter of fact, which is one of the beauties of Harvard Kennedy School, that one of our classmates was the deputy minister of education in Singapore. Another very interesting idea we had was the standardized exit exam, which is actually to be piloted in June, and all the major stakeholders with whom we met really do support the standardized exit exam for the graduates of the law schools. And of course, we really wanted to come up with the thank you notes and the blog posts so that to reach out to all the wider community and all the stakeholders as well. Next. And now a strategic way forward. One of the interesting ideas that we had with AmCham actually is bringing fruits, because we had the meeting with the director, with the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, and also with a meeting with the head of the law committee of AmCham, where all the representatives of the law firms reside. And it's already the cooperation is started in order to bring in the ranking system, so that the AmCham can cooperate together with the Association of Lawyers and bringing in the rankings, and also developing the internships. And at the same time, as I said about our Singaporean model, we sat together and prepared a memo where we outline all the model, the Singaporean model of legal education, and we presented it to the Deputy Minister of Interior of Ukraine. And now with this, I'll hand it over to Fred.
All right, thanks, Ilhom. All right, so one of the stakeholders that we met with was Sergey Kivit, who was the head of the National Agency for Higher Education Quality Assurance, NACA. If you look at our entry points, most of them point to NACA, which made this engagement a particularly important one. And Manoj and I, we were respectfully nudging Sergey to think about considering specific legal education accreditation criteria. But his response was actually really interesting. It showed that he didn't have the political, well, he didn't have the interest to do it by himself. And that he was thinking that NACA can support private sector associations to define these and to encourage their use. And that he'd be willing to engage with private sector legal associations who are interested in doing that. So as our class ended, we recommended that to our authorizer engaging with private sector associations to discuss models and best practices for legal education accreditation criteria, and to eventually create a forum where they include NACA in these conversations. The next idea we recommended was to create a legal education reform roadshow, where our authorizer promotes awareness of key findings, such as the success seen in the early exit exam pilots, which is our last bullet here, and the support from the students regarding the exit exam, the importance of separating law enforcement education from law school education, and how law enforcement education should retain state funding, but that law school education should have more autonomy and ownership and no longer be dependent on state funding. It's interesting because this will actually create kind of counterintuitive effects, because once you decrease funding for law school, quality actually increases because you create a market correction for supply and demand. And this is something that came directly from the Minister of Education. Additionally, this narrative allows you to cross the political aisle because it shows clearly that legal education reform does not take away funds from law enforcement training. If anything, it creates more funding availability in the government. And lastly, in the words of Natalia Petrova, we need to encourage our authorizer to engage more with the law enforcement side. Natalia is on the legal donor side, but there's also donors on the law enforcement side. So we need to emphasize that there are opportunities to strengthen law enforcement vocational training when it is actually separated from law school, and allow more funding to go into more practical applications. This will create more entry points to legislation, especially with those who are protective of the law enforcement community. In a way, this effort is just as much about law enforcement education reform as it is about legal education reform. I see Mike online. Mike, are you going to be doing this slide, or do you want me to take over?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Apologies for running a few minutes late here. So this last slide is really meant, and hi everyone, Mike Ramirez, by the way. I'm on the bottom left-hand corner of the screenshot of the team there. This is really meant to share, lessons learned and some final thoughts. So I won't go through each of the bullets here, but some of the few items that, we actually got from this exercise, and hopefully you've heard that in the prior slides, was there was a lot of work and it was very iterative, right? When you think about the AAA analysis, the Ishikawa, some of us on the team, for instance, like myself, weren't as familiar or comfortable with using some of the things, that we were brought forward within the process. And we're very comfortable, right? So the reality is we all learned a lot and we pushed each other. And as a team, because of the way the class is structured, we were able to work with each other on our strengths and weaknesses. So just from a team perspective, it helped us really grow. Some of our final thoughts really were the fact that we were able to have a global team. So a lot of us are in different parts of the world, really added to the complexity, but also added to the richness, right, of how we thought about the problem set. Even when we talked to Calvin Chong, which is one of our classmates, to understand what they're doing in Singapore and how that could be paralleled and related and really utilized as a use case for Ukraine. It really helped us just think about the problem set a little bit differently and the structure around PDIA, right? So for us, it was just very helpful to have a global team. So I would say, we we couldn't have done this, honestly, without having a very strong and very impactful authorizer, and Artem, taking time to, continue to guide us even outside of the classes we go through. So that was a huge plus. I think everybody on the team really enjoyed the structure. But that being said, we really look forward to seeing the sort of next steps, and I'll pass it on now to Artem and team. If there's anything else, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Artem to share his reflections on what he learned through this process. Again, to remind everyone, this is a class where we teach the PDIA approach, and the only way to learn the PDIA approach is to work on a problem. And we thought the best way to do this is to give them real world problems with real people who are working on these problems. In no way do we say we are the expert. In no way do we say we have found the answer. In fact, for those of you who know PDIA, it is the solving complex problems. You never solve them. You can resolve them and you manage them, but you never solve them. And just, that I just wanted to contextualize what this is. We are in no way saying we have solved this problem, but this was what our students were able to do, knowing nothing about the Ukraine, knowing nothing about this problem, living in different parts of the world and working with Artem. Artem, over to you to share what your experience was and what you learned through this process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Salimah. Thank you so much, team. Well, it was an absolute pleasure working with such a diverse interdisciplinary team and each of its resourceful members, Ilhom, Yousuf, Manoj, Mike, and Frederick. And even though each team member had accumulated extensive experience in public sector, public service, and in business before they were admitted to the Kennedy School, none of them had legal education specific experience or expertise. But I think that this was their strength, in fact, because they brought in their fresh perspectives, and they could see what people who have been working on this problem for a long time couldn't see. So I really appreciate this fresh perspective from the team, and it was very enlightening for me to work with the team, and I was very much humbled by how much the team accomplished within such a short period of time, 7 weeks that we worked together within the PDIA course, and it's been a great experience in all respects, and I've learned a lot from the team, from the course, and I should say that I could go on and on this particular topic, but just being mindful of the time, I would like to share with you 5 key insights that I learned through this experience. So first is, I think the method of teaching PDA by applying it to real life problem, basically coupling classroom with the field, is a powerful international development tool, which I think should be further improved and promoted. And it's great that the Kennedy School is doing this and engaging practitioners as consulting practitioners to their students working in class, and at the same time addressing real life problems. And the method is therefore a powerful learning tool. And it comes as just in time as opposed to just in case learning, because students are applying what they've learned immediately in practice. They are using the tools that they've been learning in class, and it's a great learning tool in this respect. And then a third takeaway is that the successful implementation of this method to teach PDA and to apply PDA requires a learner's mindset. And this said, it means that this requires the ability on the part of everyone involved and interest and willingness to borrow ideas, to experiment with the ideas, to learn from experiments, and to adapt to the changing environment. Then I would also highlight that such a learning setting is great for students to be able to apply their knowledge and skills in this kind of safe yet challenging space, where they can rapidly learn, unlearn, and relearn, depending on what they find out as they progress iteration by iteration. And the final thought would be, and this is evident through the experience that the team gained, especially with their classmate from the Kennedy School, who happened to serve earlier as Deputy Minister for Education in Singapore, and our encounter with the President of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine is that the PDIA is also about serendipity. It's about some unexpected discoveries that you should be working to enable and to capitalize on. So you should be ready to face such things and to use them to solve the problem, or to advance the solution. And I agree with Salimah that indeed the problem hasn't been solved yet, but we made some tangible steps and achieved some tangible results that are evident in terms of the leads that we've managed to acquire, and the additional information that we managed to obtain through this experience. And just to give you a couple of concrete examples. So now we have the American Chamber of Commerce on board as a legal education stakeholder. And we have the commitment to work on the law school rankings project in Ukraine, together with the Association of Ukrainian Lawyers. And our program is supporting this effort by providing expertise to develop the methodology for law school rankings. And we have this as a tangible result, which I'm very grateful for. So, and thank you so much to Salimah, to Matt Andrews, and to all the team for their engagement and the invitation. Thank you so much to the Kennedy School, personally to Salimah and to Matt Andrews for making this happen. I really enjoyed the experience, and looking forward to contributing to the Kennedy School again in the future.
Thank you very much, Artem. I'd now like to invite Matt Andrews to share some words and perhaps contextualize this course a little for this audience. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you, Salimah. It's great to be with everybody, and it's great to hear the story and to hear the interaction with Artem. You know, what we're trying to do here is to do something a little strange, is to put a bunch of people who are all over the world, who've never worked in a place, together with someone who's in that place, to see if they can teach each other something and if they can learn through the process. You know, international development often looks something like this, where you have outsiders who come to engage in a really difficult challenge. And very often what we see is those outsiders coming in with ideas and solutions from the outside and saying, this is what you need to do. And the methodology here is to do something different. It's to say, no, work with people who are inside, asking questions, and see if through a process of probing, you can yourselves understand the situation a little bit better as an outsider, but also help to connect people on the inside with each other in ways that they haven't been connected before. So it's not so much coming and saying, this is how you should do things, this is what the solution is. It's more proposing a different way of doing development work, where the people from the outside essentially come armed with some questions to help people on the inside ask questions differently. You might think about it a little bit as kind of like providing therapy to a situation, where in the presence of complex challenges, we think that, you know, oftentimes complex challenges are so difficult that people almost simplify the solutions more than they do with anything else, because they don't know what else to do. And we think that the best thing to do is really to raise questions and to push into those questions and to connect people together. I think you would have heard Artem saying here some of the leads that we developed and the relationships. We think that essentially the progress is all about the lessons that you learn along the way, and the leads that you make, the new relationships, the new connections. They teach you things. They also become partners as you move along. And one of the things that we want both the students in our degree program and the alums who are working in Artem's position, we want them to benefit from seeing just how much latent potential there is with the people who are in the context. You would have heard both Artem and the team speaking about how they engage with people and they learn things. Interesting, learning things from the outside, but also learning from the inside about different perspectives, different ideas, etc. I remember in the early days of this, almost every conversation that the team had, they'd come back and they'd say, wow, we just found out that, you know, this thing is happening, there's this program, this has already been tried, these people tried this. And again, one of the things we find a lot with governance reforms in particular is that there is so much going on that often people don't know what's going on, and consultants get charged with writing up a new solution rather than going out and really finding out what's going on. So the approach here was really to learn about what's going on and to try and help the people who are in the context make some sense, and simultaneously for our degree program students to learn a little bit about what this process looks like. The thing that we are so lucky with is having just great students, great alums, and tremendously interesting topics. And the alums like Artem providing really great access to people to be able to learn. So my gratitude to all of you for taking this so seriously, for bringing yourselves to it, and for committing to make it such an interesting project. So thank you very much. And I hope that the work continues. This is a very important area of work. In many, many countries, this is something that it requires a lot of attention and requires a lot of creativity. And I think that this approach that we put in asking questions and trying to find a fit between what is on the outside and what opportunities on the outside and what scope there is for movement on the inside is really, really important. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Matt. And now we're going to open up for questions and answers. If you could use the Zoom function to raise your hand to ask a question, that would be great. And I'll just kick us off with a question for all of our students as well as Artem. What surprised you about this process, either the topic or the actual process? If you could just share what surprised you, and then we'll take questions from the participants here.
Yeah, I would let the team go ahead.
I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. So, you know, as far as like what surprised me, I think that overall the amount of engagement that I came into the exercise believing would be there, and then the amount of engagement actually received, which actually was a lot more because quite frankly, you know, I live in the US, I currently live in Texas. As was stated earlier, you know, a lot of this was new to me, you know, just understanding what's going on in Ukraine, understanding the situation, learning more about even just the culture, right? Albeit it's virtual, but for me, that was the biggest surprise, because in this journey, I was able to learn more about Ukraine, to feel a little bit more cultured as far as like understanding a different part of the world and some complications that are happening. So as much as I was excited to go through the PDIA, I was also excited to learn about another country and another type of problem that's happening in the world. So that would be for me.
I can take the I can be the second person. Probably the most thing that surprised me more from the approach is the AAA approach, right, where we have ability, acceptance, and authority. Sometimes we usually think that ability is something that solves all the problem, but it was very, very interesting for me, like, to see, and a bit surprising as well, that aside from ability that we use in international development, there's so much more, like especially the acceptance part is so important that I personally used not to pay a lot of attention to that. But now, like, seeing this whole approach and combining both ability, acceptance, and authority, and seeing what impact overall it can make, that was something very, very new. And I mean, I would use the word surprising here as well, and something very, very impactful to know and to use. Yeah.
So for me, two things surprised me. Number one, in the beginning, when we started the process, I was quite apprehended. Didn't know anything about legal education, didn't know anything about Ukraine context. But then when we started touching base on a weekly basis and talking about the problem, it started becoming so simpler, and we started getting into that more engaged, and we started seeing a roadmap and pathway, and it was so a different feeling. So that's the one. Number two, when we were doing this AAA analysis, we were trying to find out entry spaces. So some places we had no entry space at all. So particularly when we're talking to Ukraine Minister of Internal Affairs, we felt there will not be any entry space. But suddenly we came to know that, well, there could be possibility to bring experience from Singapore, and that might create more entry space with the minister. And we got that, and that really made a difference. So yeah, so those are two quick points from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess from my side, I think something really interesting going through this process was how hard it was to actually define or pinpoint the problem itself. The problem really wasn't very obvious, and I think that just as students, learning the PDIA process, we had to be really careful to not get ahead of ourselves and think that we know what the problem is, and kind of using the PDIA process. It took weeks for us to eventually build out that fishbone diagram, and then the solutions. When we actually thought we had a better understanding of the problem, the solution was very counterintuitive, because you normally think of, like, if there's an area that's having a problem, well, then more funding needs to be put there. But then the solution that we were discussing with some of the stakeholders actually was like almost the opposite of that, and it was very counterintuitive. So I think just the part that I would highlight about the class is like how hard it was to actually figure out what the problem was and how many weeks it took.
Well, for me, I guess it was kind of like you learn a lot of tools, right? And then like you learn them in theory, but then it was surprising how like the tools you learn, you apply them, and then you find a fruitful impact just like 7 weeks from your application. And it was just like I had my doubts at the first, but then I was so happy like how much impact did we do in this short span of time.
Yeah, as for me, I set very high expectations from the very beginning, but the team managed to surprise me with their even greater commitment. And what was great in my view is that the team continued to work on the problem even after they delivered their final presentation and completed all the papers required for this course. So thank you so much, team. It's been a very pleasant surprise.
Great, thank you very much. We now have a question. Srikar, you have your hand raised if you would like to ask your question.
Thank you, Salimah. I'm Srikar. I'm an incoming mid-career MPA student for 2022. Hopefully will be in Cambridge in the fall if flights permit travel from India. Thank you for this fascinating discussion. Actually, being a law student, I was interested in this presentation. I have two questions to the team. One was in terms of content and one in process. Having seen the legal reform in India, I just have two questions. One, how much of the reform should be actually led by internal interests in terms of the internal judicial interests, in terms of internal teams of law faculty and the system? Because in India, we had that experience of law reform 25 years ago. It was led internally by the judicial system. And in terms of process, do they see any vested interests within the Ukrainian system to keep the status quo of legal education in their study? Did they come across any examples? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the team.
Yes, I think incorporating people that are insiders is absolutely pivotal. And I think that eventually, in order for a solution to really come about, one of the recommendations was trying to connect NACA with more of the private sector. And I think that's essentially harnessing both internal entities to Ukraine to try to collaborate to come up with more specific legal education criteria. And then your second question was about is there any interest to keep the status quo? I think absolutely. I think that one of the entry points was for us to try to figure out a way to articulate that legal education reform doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking away from law enforcement education or from money from law enforcement. I think that trying to create that bridge was one of the key entry points that we tried to produce, because I think that there is an incentive to keep the status quo because there's a lot of funding and support for the law enforcement community, and people might think that legal education reform tries to undermine that, and we were trying to articulate that it really doesn't.
Team.
Did you want to respond also, Artem?
Yes, I was going to ask some of the team members to add if they have any, and if not, I would agree with Fred's assessment. Yes, there is a lot of invested interests and the interest in preserving the status quo. That's why it's so hard to reform. But step by step, it's possible. With initiatives like this, we are making progress.
Great, thank you. Katya, you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question?
Thanks, Salimah, and thank you to the team for your presentation. It was super interesting, and congratulations on all the work that you did over the past semester. I'm curious what insights and learnings about the PDIA process overall that you each think you'll carry with you in future endeavors.
Okay, I think I'm talking too much, but I would say that what I'm definitely going to carry with me is to really fall in love with the problem, and to not just go quickly over that step, but to really try to understand it.
I can go next. For me, it was probably not having a predetermined solution to problem. This is something that we usually do. and to really try to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the problem and see what are the possibilities out there.
Yeah, same for me. A deconstruction of problem was my big takeaway, and yeah, and so I'm looking forward to applying this PDIA tool in international development, but also I'm looking at how we can apply this in international humanitarian world. Thank you.
Yeah, for me it was like finding the small steps that would make the biggest change. Like finding the space where you can be more impactful and then kind of strategize your way through. Like usually you go into a problem and it's a bigger and a very big problem and you see a wall just in front of you, but then you look around, there has to be a small hole that you can pass through.
Great, thank you. Artem, did you also respond?
Yes, well, I outlined the key insights on the application of the PDIA methodology and submitted the blog post, and hopefully it will be published soon. So you'll be able to read more about the experience and the takeaways, hopefully soon.
Salimah, I see Michael Woolcock is on, and whenever it's anything to do with legal issues or judicial reform, I always love to hear Michael's view. I know that Michael has also done some work in Ukraine on public administration and governance. Michael, vested interests in Ukraine, challenges with getting buy-in and understanding how to do legal reform. Any thoughts or comments?
My thoughts are just to note that I think Ukraine is the only country or the language that has fully translated the book, as opposed, we've had a bunch of countries do the toolkit, but Ukraine was ahead of the curve in getting the whole book translated. There's been some production issues, which we're still in the final stages of sorting out, but nonetheless, it's to hold the whole book in Ukrainian in Cyrillic language is just magical. And a lot of people behind the scenes have been pushing for that to happen. It's their own sort of nerdy way of contributing to something that will hopefully then be enabled to be taught in public administration schools. I know that there's been a major shakeup recently in the whole structuring of higher education in Ukraine, and particularly in the equivalent of Kennedy School type organizations in Ukraine, and that's going to be quite profound, actually, how those changes unfold in the coming years. So anyway, my interjection at this point is really just to note that there's always different ways, seen and unseen, that these reform processes happen. And the particular NGO, a leader of the state, that has been pushing the PDIA work in its own quiet way, has been instrumental in facilitating 3 of my visits to Ukraine, and where I've met Artem, and when he's been a very active contributor to this, not just in this immediate forum where we're talking now, but in his own way contributing to this, to the expansion of the PDIA community, as it were, in Ukraine. So this is just I hope a thin end of a much broader, longer process. So amidst all of the really wrenching geopolitics in Ukraine at the moment, and all the challenges that are likely to emerge even more so in the coming months as elections warm up, I think the task of people like us is just to be very patient, very persistent, and to just do what we can. And as you said, as we've all said, to do that with modesty and humility, with a deep recognition of our outsider status, but as contributors nonetheless, and who can do what they can do. And I'm hopeful. You have to be, anyone in development has to be hopeful. You wouldn't survive if you weren't. But I hope that the evolving terrain for discussing these kinds of things, and the insertion into that terrain of something like these kind of experiences, plus the translated version of the book, really can be the beginning of or the continuance, I should say, of a long-standing effort by many very brave people to do this kind of work. It's Ukraine isn't on everybody's radar screen, but it's a tough place to work, really, really hard place to work, and hard for the World Bank, hard for any outside agency to really function well. And it takes just mostly bravery rather than brains to do this kind of work. And that's what moves me most about seeing this. The people that stand up for this kind of work is their persistence with it in the face of very wrenching obstacles, and entrenched interests that are not just entrenched but are nasty, potentially very aggressive, and backed by very powerful forces. And in that sense, it often feels like this kind of work is just sort of a water pistol and a machine gun fight. It's just it's up against these really entrenched forces, but it has to be enough. It has to be what we can do, and other processes will play themselves out in due course. Thanks.
Matt, did you want to add anything else?
No, I just on mute said thank you, Michael. I think Michael kind of closed us out so beautifully there, and I think it is his sentiments. I just echo his sentiments as well, and just to say it's one of the great things about having connections with people like Artem and with our students. I think that we can do a lot in the world, and we need to do it with humility, and we need to do it with care. And I think that this is a group of people who do that, and it's about moving forward together, step by step, but as quickly as possible, right? But as in step by step, not kind of gigantic leaps that jump over the context and that fail to recognize the realities on the ground. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Salimah.
Great, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the hour. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all our students for trusting us in this process and for taking a chance to learn how this approach works. Thank you to Artem for working with our students and supporting them, spending every week meeting with them, sharing contacts with them, and to all the people who spoke to our students and helped them better understand this problem. And thank you all for participating. Our next event will be next Tuesday, May 18th at noon Eastern Time. And the topic will be exploring trade between Kenya and Canada. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.